I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, oil spill survivors in San Diego, the biggest worry for vets who are cleaning up the marine mammals.
A federal court ruling leaves millions of people in legal limbo and subject to deportation. I'm Peggy Pico with the impact of the stay on President Obama's executive immigration order. And the U.S. Supreme Court will hear a case that could change voting districts. What's at stake for racial minorities and our political structure?
I definitely live paycheck to paycheck.
Feeling left out, why San Diego school leaders say a state-funded preschool program is leaving families behind. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Trying to hammer out a deal to keep the Chargers in San Diego. Stadium negotiations begin next week for the city of San Diego and the team. Now, both sides start meeting on Tuesday. The mayor's advisory group released their plans last week to pay for a brand new multi-use sporting venue. The group says it found $1.4 billion in funding sources. This 65,000-seat stadium would replace the Q in Mission Valley. So far, the Chargers have not issued a public evaluation of the financing plan. Both Chargers and Oakland Raiders officials have called the Carson Stadium plan a backup in case they can't forge a deal in their home cities. The National Sierra Club is hoping to influence the debate over a massive trade package. It's being negotiated in Washington, D.C. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson says the club is buying radio time to influence public opinion here in San Diego. Eric, what's the big idea behind this latest move?
Well, Dwayne, the Sierra Club is concerned that this massive trade deal called the Trans-Pacific Partnership is being negotiated outside of the public's view. Now, if it passes, it would be the largest free trade agreement that the U.S. is party to. The National Sierra Club bought radio time this week in San Diego to highlight their concerns.
The massive trade deal between the U.S. and 11 other countries that is being negotiated behind closed doors, keeping it a secret from concerned citizens like you.
The Sierra Club is worrying that the trade agreement will undermine the nation's environmental rules by creating exemptions for large corporations. Now, the ads began running in San Diego this week. The environmental group had already reached out to residents in the Pacific Northwest and in Northern California.
Eric, why the public? It seems the battleground appears to be between those in Congress, right?
That is correct, Dwayne. In fact, trade deal supporters won a huge victory last week when the U.S. Senate voted to give President Barack Obama fast-track authority to negotiate a deal.
We've always known that one of the paths to more good-paying jobs in our country is exports. There are going to be 1 billion middle-class people, 1 billion, in the developing world in 2025. These are people with money, colleagues. They're going to buy our wine, our computers, our helicopters, our planes, all kinds of goods and services with the American brand.
But it looks like the battle is still far from resolved in the House. One local lawmaker is a target for TPP opponents. They want Scott Peters to speak out against the deal. He said this week that he remains undecided, but he is open to hearing arguments on both sides of the issue. It's not clear yet when the House is going to vote.
KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. She is going home. The teenage girl convicted of setting a fire that led to the massive Cocos wildfire was sentenced today. A judge ordered her to perform 400 hours of community service. There are media reports that the 14-year-old was also ordered to write an apology to each victim. The Cocos Fire burned nearly 2,000 acres and destroyed more than 35 homes last year. Cleanup operations continue off the coastline of Santa Barbara after a broken pipeline spilled tens of thousands of gallons of oil last week. Oil blackened area beaches and created a 10-square-mile slick off the ocean after the onshore pipe ruptured. The company that owns the pipeline says they are working on a plan to excavate the broken section. No word yet, though, on when that will begin. 10,000 gallons of oily water have been recovered from the ocean as government and volunteer workers clean up along the coastline.
At this point, we are accepting registrations for volunteers. We had trainings to participate in an oil spill response requires special training. So we've been offering a special hazardous communications class. It's about a 4-hour class that volunteers can sign up for.
There are more than 900 workers cleaning the beaches and the water. More oily sea lions and elephant seals rescued from the oil slick in Santa Barbara. So far, SeaWorld has rescued 19, but 2 have died. Most were dehydrated and malnourished. About 25% of their bodies were covered in oil, primarily on the bottom of their flippers and belly. SeaWorld veterinarian Todd Schmidt says swallowing, inhaling, or absorbing the oil is their biggest concern.
If they absorb the hydrocarbons, a lot of those hydrocarbons actually go to the blubber. So if this is a female, she's going to retain a lot of those hydrocarbons in her blubber, and then she'll offload that to her first offspring when she's sexually mature or when she's pupping.
SeaWorld rescue teams are expected to double a record set more than 30 years ago, already rescuing nearly 900 seals and sea lions this year. It could take several weeks of rehab before they're ready to be released again. Targeting so-called frivolous ballot measures, State Assembly passed a bill that would raise the filing fee for a voter initiative or referendum to $8,000. That's up from $200. Lawmakers say the bill is in response to a ballot initiative that calls for gays and lesbians to be put to death by firing squad. Critics say the bill would slant the initiative process in favor of wealthy special interests. The measure now moves to the state Senate. One person, one vote. This concept will be tested by the highest court in the land in a case challenging how voting districts are decided. Peggy Pico explains the potential impact on San Diego districts.
Right now, voting districts are determined by the total number of people living within the district. Those districts are mandated to be equal in population size. Instead, this case argues voting districts should be determined by the number of eligible voters. Here to explain the impact of this kind of change and how it could have an impact on minorities and California's political structure are my guest, political science professor Carl Luna and constitutional law expert attorney Dan Eaton. And Dan, the plaintiffs in this case claim that the current method of determining district boundaries are not equitable. What are the arguments they're making to support that claim?
Peggy, the plaintiffs are saying that, look, you need to determine districts by voters, not by raw population, because when you determine it by raw population, which includes ineligible voters, includes eligible people, then we have a problem because voter strength is diluted. They say, look, raw population, which is what many circuit courts have held is the appropriate way to determine districts, is a wrong standard because it dilutes voter rights. And under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, they say that is wrong.
So that's what's at question. But what about racial composition of voting districts? It's often the focus of legal actions. Tell us about the Voting Rights Act and how it's supposed to protect racial minorities.
Right. The Voting Rights Act, of course, was enacted in 1965 and was derived from the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which prohibits states from enacting laws that impair voting based on race. And what it does is prohibit states from enacting laws that impair voting based on race or language. And that's the bottom line. That issue is not here before the court. This is a very different question. This is whether, as a matter of structure, states are permitted to decide districts based on overall population or whether they must decide it based on citizens of voting age population.
Well, Carl, aside from it not being the question, certainly this, if this ruling goes in favor of eligible voters, it would change the racial minority makeup of a district, or would it?
Well, it's going to affect race, it's going to affect age, it's going to affect income distribution. The younger, the poorer, the less white you are, the less you're going to be a part of the apportionment, because that's the portion of the population that if you're under 18, you can't be eligible to vote. Illegal immigrant, not eligible to vote. Populations that are younger with more kids, that's going to be diluted out. You're wealthier, you're older, you're more likely to be eligible to vote. I don't think it's a coincidence that this is being put through by a political party, this challenge, that would benefit under these circumstances.
Well, before we get to that, why do you think it would pan out that way? Why would it be that older white people would get more representation than minorities?
Well, take the county of San Diego, should you adopt that here. If you go out into the county, you're going to have an older population, a whiter population, a wealthier population. The odds that these are eligible voters is simply going to be higher than if you're in southeast San Diego, if you're in the urban areas of San Diego, where to begin with, you'll simply have more kids. A household with children is not not going to be counted as much as a retirement household.
Do you agree with that, Dan?
Well, it depends on how far the court goes. If it agrees with the plaintiff's argument, doesn't it? Because the question is exactly what does one person, one vote mean? And there are any number of ways the Supreme Court can define it. And the fact is, since its landmark decision in 1964, Reynolds versus Sim, the Supreme Court has not yet clearly defined it. And that's why this case is being reviewed now.
And I'll ask both of you this, starting with you, Dan. Aren't elected officials supposed to represent all people in the district, whether you're of voting age or not? They're supposed to represent the people in that district, right?
Well, certainly the Ninth Circuit in a 1990 case involving the supervisorial districts in the county of Los Angeles felt so. They said so in a footnote. But this really gets to a basic issue of what the Constitution means. Are we talking about equality of representation, or are we talking about electoral equality? And that's really the tension at the heart of this particular lawsuit, Peggy.
And Carl, would you say that is true? How would people be represented if this law went through?
Well, on the surface, there is a constitutional theoretical debate. Is it the trustee model where you vote for the people, or the delegate model, you vote for the ones who brought you in as a representative? I see this as a part of a tapestry which is saying a certain group in America is not doing as well under current demographic changes. This is a move to reinforce my side while I still have the time to do it. Bottom line, no matter how you slice and dice it, I tend to think if you're older, whiter, conservative, you will do better with this if the Supreme Court even allows it in states. Now, if you would benefit by having it one man, one vote, where everybody gets counted, the plaintiffs would have been on that side of the equation and see it to benefit them. There is a political end of this, whether or not it's a constitutional question.
And we'll have to end on this. Do you think there's a political end to this?
This is ultimately a constitutional question, and the court is going to decide it on constitutional grounds.
All right, Dan Eaton and Carl Luna, thanks so much.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you.
Tracking El Nino, U.S. forecasters say they found strong weather patterns in the tropical Pacific, but they're not expecting El Nino to end the drought in California. The National Weather Service says that weather pattern does not guarantee record-breaking rainfall or a drought-ending year. It just means there is a potential for above-average precipitation. The early El Nino forecast was similar a year ago, but it brought very little relief to California. A deadly storm slams into Texas. Rising rivers swept away homes, some with people still inside. Associated Press reporter John Mon says more than a dozen people are still missing tonight.
The raw power of rushing water. Toppling trees turning everyday life upside down.
The water was right to here in 20 minutes, okay? And then in 25 minutes, it was across the road over there.
Gay Sullivan made her home right by the River Blanco in Wimberley in the heart of central Texas. Overnight Sunday, she had minutes to escape flash floods.
It was there and our cars were floating. We helped them get their cars out, you know, and then when I looked over, I said, oh, our cars are floating.
Her son, who helped her escape, now trying to salvage what's left of the house.
You can see some of the trees that are this big around that are just ripped, just twisted and broken, just like a toothpick. It's incredible.
Mother Nature's power also tearing families apart.
We are in a house that is now floating down the river. Call Mom and Dad. I love you, and pray.
Those are the last words Julie Shields heard from her sister Laura McComb as the raging waters ripped her family's cabin from its foundation. Shields was on the phone with her sister, who was inside with her children.
And I just expected to go to the Wimberley High School the next day and find her. And then when she wasn't there, I knew something was very, very wrong.
McComb and her children among the 13 still missing. The National Guard and police continue their search. John Moan, Associated Press, Wimberley, Texas.
On the education desk, helping working families in need, there are new questions tonight about California's early childhood education program. The director of San Diego Unified's preschool program says many families say they're being left behind. KPBS education reporter Matt Bowler has the story.
This has been a long-term situation of neglect, and it's neglect by the state.
Robin McCulloch runs San Diego Unified's early childhood education programs. She's in charge of the California preschool program for San Diego Unified. State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Torlakson, in his statement, touts the importance of preschool. He says, "We now know that 90% of brain development occurs before the age of 5 years old, which is why early education is so important." The program offers 3 hours a day of preschool, provided families meet strict income limits. A family of 3 cannot earn more than $3,518 a month. McCulloch says $1 over, and families are excluded.
Probably 2 or 3 times a month I have to talk to somebody who's very upset because they came, within $10 or $50 of qualifying.
Jessica Cleaver, Manuel Alvarado, and their 3-year-old son Oliver are one of those families just over the limit.
If I just take my income into consideration, it's exactly $45 a month too much. And if I take both of our incomes into consideration, it's by a couple $100.
Cleaver works for the city of Escondido. Alvarado is a stay-at-home dad and takes night classes and works at the Walmart on the weekends. Cleaver says they don't spend on luxuries.
I mean, I definitely live paycheck to paycheck, so I need that money that's coming in, and once it comes in, it's pretty much spent on all the expenses with very little left over.
McCulloch says she sees families in this position all the time.
And they can't qualify. They're not people who are wealthy or even middle income earners. They're families with great need.
There is no wiggle room. The federal free and reduced school lunch program have at least one income step to help families. Not so for California preschool.
It seems like there's no gray areas in this whole, situation of having a state-funded thing where I can, give Oliver a head start.
McCulloch says parents desperate for preschool offer to give the small amount they earn over the limit to the district as payment.
They oftentimes will say to me, "I'm willing to pay the difference," and we're not allowed to admit them in the program according to our regulations.
In the meantime, Alvarado and Cleaver try to teach their son what they can.
We read them books, we point out the A's, the B's, the C's, as much as we can. But, you hit these walls where, after a while, you can't get through to a child because you're just dad.
Alvarado says mothers and fathers play a role in a young child's education. It's just they aren't educators.
Teachers are teachers for a reason, and it doesn't come naturally with a lot of people.
Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
On notice from the state, so-called fifth-year seniors, there's a new effort from the state capitol to help college students graduate on time. They've introduced a new bill to hire more teachers and guidance counselors and increase funds up to $50 million at both the CSU and UC systems. State lawmakers say it should allow schools to take on more students.
The whole goal of SB 15 is to get students 4-year degrees in 4 years. What a concept. Now it's taking students 6 or 7 years in many cases to get a 4-year degree.
Educators say the bill helps close gaps between jobs requiring bachelor's degrees and the number of working adults who have them. Immigration reform on hold. Last night we told you about the latest decision to uphold a stay against President Obama's executive order on immigration. Peggy Pico explains how the ruling will impact eligible immigrants in San Diego.
The ruling means an estimated 4 million people living in the U.S. illegally who are eligible for DAPA, or Deferred Action for Parents and Lawful Permanent Residence program, remain in legal limbo and are subject to deportation. 26 states sued the U.S. government to stop the program from moving forward. Joining me with an update are Ev Mead, director of the Transborder Institute at the University of San Diego, and immigration and naturalization attorney Lilia Velasquez. And Ev, today's court ruling was specifically, or Tuesday's, I should say, court ruling was specifically focused on whether or not to lift the stay on President Obama's executive action on immigration. What did the court find?
That's right. So the court upheld the injunction, which basically puts the president's executive actions on indefinite hold. The court found that basically that this should not count as prosecutorial discretion, that the federal government is forcing the states in question, particularly Texas, to either incur costs or change the policies, and they found that the government doesn't have a right to a stay of an injunction.
Now, the 26 states in the lawsuit are, for those reasons, are opposed to moving forward on this plan. 17 states are in agreement with it. What are the claims in the lawsuit specifically?
The claims in the lawsuit, the biggest claim is the costs that the states are going to have to incur. And the one they keep citing over and over again is the driver's license policy in the state of Texas. The problem is that, as the government points out, is that they're weighing one very specific cost in Texas, but they're not considering the broader economic impact of the plan. So they consider the cost of giving the driver's licenses, but not the decrease in the cost of auto insurance or vehicle registration fees, or the impact on the economy. I mean, there are estimates right now that say over 10 years this could contribute $260 billion to U.S. GDP. That's a lot, or $20 billion over the next 5 years just to our tax roll. So that stuff doesn't count in this lawsuit, or hasn't counted so far.
Okay, and Lilia, the lawsuit challenges the president's DAPA program and an expanded version of the DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Remind us of how those programs are supposed to work, what they're intended for.
Well, the expanded DACA was really to provide dreamers with another opportunity to apply by removing the age limit, that it should be 31 as of the date that the measure was adopted, and also the moving forward the entry date. Before, they have to have entered before June of 2007. Now they move it to January 1st of 2010, making more people eligible for DACA. In terms of the DAPA, that was the big one. That was for the parents who have U.S. citizen children, regardless of age, who are either U.S. citizens or have permanent legal status, and who enter before January 1st of 2010. And it will be the same benefit as the DACA folks. They would get deferred action, which means their deportation will be deferred. They would get a work permit. They can travel within the U.S. So it was a big thing for our community when you consider the lack of legalization.
So that's what it was intended to do. Now with this stay, what's happened now? What's the impact been on people who would have been eligible for these programs in San Diego?
The impact has been devastating. I mean, on all of us, on the clients who keep calling, is it over? And I said, no, it's not over. We're not ready to throw in the towel. We need to continue fighting. But I have been talking to those clients through their DACA kids when they brought them over. You know, let's be patient. You will qualify. You seem to meet the guidelines. And so they're calling me and say, so what do we do now?
Because this could divide families, right? You have a case that has 2 children who would be eligible?
I have many cases, but typically mom and dad have no documents. 2 kids were born in the U.S. 2 have DACA status. So if mom and dad get arrested, what happens to that family? They have to go home and take with them the U.S. citizen kids, and the kids with DACA who cannot travel, will they be able to stay here? So it really has complicated their lives, and it's very sad just to see the anguish that they, you know, after hearing the news.
And Ev, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals will hear arguments at the heart of this case beginning in July, I understand. Will we have to wait until then for more, or could there be some action before then to take care of these people in San Diego?
I think, unfortunately, we'll have to wait until the merits hearing, and if that goes against the government, then we'll have to wait for a lengthy appeals process after that.
Do you have any indication of which direction this is going to go?
Well, the court in upholding the injunction today said that they thought the government's case was likely to lose on the merits. I was a little bit surprised by that, having seen the initial injunction written by the judge, which seemed to be a little bit out of left field. But if that's the indication, then this is something that will involve a lengthy appeals process.
All right, we will keep following it. Ev Mead and Lilia Velasquez, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
New details from the Justice Department tonight. We're now learning the government will not ask the Supreme Court to review a judge's decision that put on hold President Obama's executive action. The Justice Department says it will now focus an appeal that will be argued the week of July 6th.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next News Hour, trying to find homes for Morocco's orphans, where an estimated 24 children are abandoned every day. That's Wednesday on the PBS News Hour.
No buts on clean energy efforts. Caltrans found a way to get more out of used cigarettes tossed at rest stops. New disposable boxes will make it easier for drivers to deposit entire ashtrays into the box instead of onto the road. The used cigarettes will be collected and transported to a plant in L.A. where they will be burned to generate electricity. The ash will be used to make concrete.
We plan on expanding it all the way to rest areas throughout the state, all 88 rest areas, freeway off-ramps, and eventually on-ramps with meters so people can get rid of their cigarettes before getting onto the freeway in the morning.
They may collect up to 6 million cigarettes by the end of this year. The company plans on updating Caltrans on how much energy was generated from the trash. Well, it's starting to get a little warmer around here. We're looking at still gray skies along the coast with temperatures mostly in the upper 60s. A little more sunshine expected by afternoon for the inland valleys. Temperatures there in the mid to upper 70s, and then plenty of sunshine in the mountain areas, 70s and 80s there. And it will feel hot in the desert with temperatures reaching the triple-digit mark. Here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Midday Edition, embattled San Diego County Supervisor Dave Roberts answers questions about his use of county funds and why so many of his staff have quit. Join us at noon tomorrow on KPBS Radio. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.